On Saturday, July 16th, 2011, 17-year-old Tyler Hadley threw a party at his home that he had been dreaming of. No parents, just a bunch of teenagers doing things teenagers shouldn't do. Alcohol, drugs, you've got it. By the next morning, Tyler was under arrest, and not because of the house party. What happened in this home? This is True Crime Out Loud.
I'm your host, B.
And I'm your host, Jen.
This week's case takes us to Port St. Lucie, Florida. Port St. Lucie is located about 40 miles north of West Palm Beach, Florida, and it was mostly uninhabited in the 1950s. It was developed as a retirement town in 1961 by three brothers. Not the kind of place I would want to hang out in Florida because there's no direct beach access. In 1970, it had a population of about 330 people, but it grew dramatically and increased to about 15,000 in 1980, and in 2010, the population had passed 164,000. Now, with that population growth, they saw a big decrease in the median age. Over one-third of the residents there are younger than 24, and they have a exploding teen population. As I said, there's no direct beach access, and so the teens don't have much to do, and a lot of their crime issues are from juveniles. It is also known as the New York Met spring training location.
So the family this week that we're going to talk about is the Hadley family. They lived at 371 Northeast Granger Street. The family patriarch was Blake, and the mother was Mary Jo, and they had moved there in 1987 from Fort Lauderdale to be closer to Blake's parents. Now, Blake was 54, and he was a watch engineer at St. Lucie Power Plant for 30 years. Mary Jo was 47, and she was a loved elementary school teacher. Ryan was their oldest child, and Ryan had recently moved to North Carolina about 6 weeks before the event to attend college. And his plan was after college, he was going to move back to Port St. Lucie and work alongside his father. Their youngest child was Tyler, and Tyler was 17. So Ryan was 6 years older than Tyler. At the end of the block where their home was located was the St. Lucie River. So this case takes place in July of 2011. The week of this event, Tyler had told his friends that his parents would be out of town that weekend and he was going to have a big party. And he had always wanted to have like just this dramatic party at his home. Well, his friends didn't believe him because they knew, first of all, he had never thrown a party before, but second of all, his parents were kind of strict and wouldn't allow him to throw a party. So Saturday, July 16th of 2011, the morning of, Mary Jo and Blake had gone and done some shopping and got home in the early afternoon hours. Blake took a nap and Mary Jo got on the family computer just doing some things she wanted to do. Tyler was communicating on Facebook Messenger, and he was asked by a friend if the party was still on, and Tyler responded, "I'm working on it." The friend asked, "Are your parents home?" And he said, "Nope. Well, they're going to be leaving soon." At 1:15 p.m. on that day, Tyler made a Facebook post. "Party at my crib tonight, ... maybe." At 8:15 p.m. on the same day, the Facebook post read, "Party at my house, HMU," which means hit me up for old people like me. One person responded with, "What if your parents come home?" And Tyler's response was, "They won't. Trust me."
That doesn't sound good.
So the party is on Saturday, July 16th in 2011, but it started late. It didn't start till about 9 p.m. And friends showed up, and they said Tyler was wearing a black t-shirt, black Dickie pants, and black Nike Air high tops. Tyler had been using ecstasy, and he seemed really anxious. People say he acted strange, but he was kind of a strange guy anyway. Most of the people at this party, though, didn't even know Tyler. They just heard about it, and like teenagers do, they just show up to party. Around midnight, Mark Andrews, who was a friend of Tyler's, drove him to the store, which was about a block away from where Tyler's home was. And Tyler gave Mark this wad of cash to go buy 4 cases of Busch Light beer, because Mark was 21 and, of course, Tyler's 17. In the car was Mark's girlfriend, Ashley, who really didn't know Tyler all that well. What she later says is when Mark was in the store, Tyler told her that his father had died, and she just assumed that this was years before by the way he was talking about it. So they go back to the party. People played beer pong on the dining room table. They were throwing empty beer cans in the yard. They were breaking things inside of the home. It was reported that one kid was selling some white pills for $1 each. Another was selling marijuana. And initially, when the party started, Tyler wouldn't let people smoke cigarettes inside the house or marijuana. They had to go outside. He wasn't really worried later on about people destroying the house, but more so with the noise going on outside because, he didn't want neighbors to call the police. He began telling people, go inside. I don't care if you smoke in there. Later, it was found that cigarettes were even extinguished on the den rug. There were kids gathered around the computer playing music, and people noticed that on the computer keyboard there was something like sticky and dark colored. It was like a thick brown liquid that looked like it was possibly like a spilled soda or something along those lines. Mm-hmm. Well, when people asked about where his parents were, he told some that his parents were in Georgia. He told some others that his parents were in Orlando, and he told some they were in West Palm Beach, Florida. He told one person at the party that his parents didn't live there and that was his house. People noticed they had free reign of the house except for the master bedroom, and it was closed and locked. Tyler didn't want people going even into the hallway that led to this master bedroom. It's reported that by midnight, and I found different numbers according to the sources, that there were 30 people and some say up to 60 people at this party. There were 2 family dogs in the home, and kids said that one was hiding in the shower and another was in a closet in a bedroom. So Mark Andrews, the guy that went and bought the beer earlier with Tyler, as he was leaving, Tyler told Mark, he said, "Can I talk to you in private?" Well, they go outside and they're talking in private, and Tyler said, "I did some things and I might go to prison, like for life." And he said, "I'm freaking out right now." Mark asked him, what's going on? He said, "You wouldn't believe it, but I killed someone." Mark said to Tyler, "You killing someone is your own business. Don't be telling me that sort of thing. I don't need to know." So Mark leaves Tyler's home. Well, another person at the party was Ricardo Acevedo, who was 18. And he also said when he left, Tyler wanted to talk to him. Well, Tyler tells Ricardo, "I'm going to kill myself." And when he asked him why, Tyler says, "Because I did something bad." And Ricardo says, "It can't be that bad." And Tyler says, "If I get caught, I'll be in jail a long time." He tells another girl at the party, Kimberly, he said he was going to be going away soon for 60 years. And she asked why, and he said, "Well, you'll find out tomorrow." So we're moving into the early morning hours of Sunday, July 17th. And somebody says, "Hey, there's another party at another house close by." So kids load up in their cars and they start speeding out of the neighborhood, playing loud music, squealing tires. And when they arrive at this other home, it was just some kind of rumor and there was no party. So they all come back to Tyler's house. But during the meantime, this tire squealing and loud music was way too much for the neighbors. And so one of the neighbors named Rianne Wallace called the police around this 2 a.m. mark. The police arrived, but this was while the people had gone to see if the party was at another location, and it was reported that there was less than 20 people left at the party by this time. Police rang the doorbell, and Tyler told everybody, "Go hide in my room and just be quiet." Tyler answers the door, and he talked to the police for a few minutes, and I guess they figured everything was okay, so they left. Well, after the police leave, the party continues, and then the other people have come back by this point. But the party wound up dying down around 3 a.m. on the morning of July 17th. But Tyler was telling people that he might be having another one that same night, that Sunday night. And at 4 a.m., he posted on Facebook, "Party at my house again, HMU." Again, hit me up for us old folks. This is where the party ends. But I want to go back and cover some things that happened as far as some things Tyler was saying before this party.
Yeah, so on July 2nd, 2011, he exchanged Facebook messages with Mercedes Marco. Tyler's mom had taken his phone, and Tyler sent the message, "For show, might kill her." And Mercedes, not believing this, responded with, "OMG, no, jail, or I mean prison, LOL." And Tyler responds with, "Oh well." Now, Tyler had another friend named Marky Phillips, and Marky had missed the party because he was out of town. But Tyler played video games with Marky a lot, and in fact, he had been at his home 2 nights before the party, and Tyler seemed normal. But 2 weeks before, when playing video games at Marky's home, Tyler said he wanted to kill his parents and may have a big party afterward. And Marky told him that this was crazy and thought Tyler was joking. And this is the kind of thing that, happens a lot. I don't think he took him seriously. He just thought it was teenagers griping about their parents.
Which is normal.
Yeah. So that's just a little bit of background on some things, I guess, trouble signs that were foreshadowing things to come. Now, on July 16th, 2011, earlier in the day, Tyler had some messages with Matthew Noble, who's also 17. At 9:40 a.m., Matthew asks Tyler, "Did you do it?" And Tyler responds with, "No, but I'm gonna." Matthew says, "Bet, you really should now." And Tyler says, "Don't worry, I am, and then I'm having a party." And Matthew responds with, "Yeah, party time." So now we're talking about it even in more detail. I mean, it's not just a passing thing like, "Oh, yeah, I ought to kill my parents." I mean, sounds like we're discussing it fairly in depth now.
And I have to wonder if Matthew Noble, it's kind of like, "You should do it," if he probably still thinks, he's just full of it and I'm just playing into this fantasy that he has going on.
Probably so, because I think that any level-headed, regular teenage kid is just going along with his buddy. Probably doesn't really think. It doesn't sound like a co-conspirator kind of thing at this point to me.
Yeah, well, let's talk about Tyler's best friend, Michael Mandel. They had been best friends since they were about 8 years old. And, I said Tyler was telling people at the party, "I need to talk to you in private," and discussing things going on. Well, he tells Mike the same thing. They walked outside and they walked toward the end of the street to have some privacy. And Tyler directly tells Michael, "I killed my parents." And Michael's like, "Yeah, right." Tyler's like, "I'm being real. Look at the signs." And Michael looks in the driveway. Blake's Toyota Tacoma's there. And Mary Jo's Expedition is there, along with Tyler's car. Michael's like, okay, maybe something is going on here. Well, Tyler takes Michael inside the garage where Michael saw a bloody footprint. But he still doesn't really believe him, which is a normal reaction. So he said, "I'm not going to believe you until you show me their bodies." That's what Tyler did. He took Michael to the master bedroom that had been locked. In the master bedroom, on the outside before Tyler unlocks the door, Michael saw traces of blood on the door and the baseboard near the door. Tyler unlocks the door, and when he opened it, Michael saw Blake's legs sticking out from under a pile of what he described as clothing, chairs, and some blood-soaked towels. That was enough for Michael. So they leave the bedroom, lock it back up, and go to the garage. And then they took a selfie together. And I'll have this on the website. It was a picture of Michael and Tyler. And Michael later says, "I took this picture because I knew it would be our last photo together." But Michael stays at that party a few more hours. He said he was just basically in disbelief and just felt like he should be there, even though he knew he should be calling the police at that point. After the fact, when police talked to Michael, here's what Michael tells them that Tyler told him happened. He said shortly before 5 p.m., he hit his parents' cell phone so they couldn't call for help. Then he listened to Feel Lucky by Lil Boozy to kind of psych himself up. He took 3 pills of ecstasy because he said he didn't think he would be able to kill them while he was sober and needed to get something in him. He goes to the garage and he gets a claw hammer as his weapon. Mary Jo was on the computer in the den area, and Tyler said he stood behind her for 5 minutes. And then he finally did it. He started hitting her on the head, and she was screaming and saying, "Why?" This woke Blake from his nap, so he ran from the master bedroom to the den area. Now, Blake is 6'1", 300 pounds. Tyler is 6'1", 160 pounds. Blake runs in there, and he's yelling and asking why. And Tyler says,
"Why the fuck not?"
And Tyler says he just kept repeating this while he was beating his father to death with the claw end of the hammer. He said when he was done, he wrapped towels around their heads and then dragged them into the master bedroom. He put any incriminating evidence into the master bedroom with them, but not just with them, on top of them. He said it took him 3 hours to clean up, which was a lot longer than what he expected, so that's why the party started later. He took a shower, and he says he looked in the mirror, and then he laughed. Well, also, we find out that while at the party, after Tyler has revealed this to Michael, Michael tells another friend that Tyler killed his parents.
Because teenagers aren't going to be able to keep their mouth shut anyway.
Yeah, for the most part, they don't. So this friend is the one that reports it to the police. And when he reports it to the police, he says, hey, the guy that told me has already called Crime Stoppers. We do know that someone called the Orlando area Crime Stoppers. There were several calls made.
Now we're going to listen to a couple of those calls to police.
He told me that the kid got up, and he was like, he told me that, like, the gist of it, that he did something to his parents. And I was like, bro, I don't want to know any details.
Okay, did he say, like, specific, like, did he hurt them? Are they still alive?
It's like, no, like, my understanding of it was that he killed them. Parents are supposed, like, their bodies are supposed to be at his house, apparently. That's my understanding of it. It all got jumbled up. I mean, like, I'm really, like, scared, like, and confused, you know?
He's claiming that he killed his parents at about 5 o'clock last night. I guess they're constantly fighting, and they are supposed to be in their bedroom.
Remember, he had posted on Facebook at about 4:40 a.m. that he was going to have another party at his house and to hit him up. Well, what Tyler didn't know is that the police were already outside of the home when he posted that on Facebook. They were dispatched to his house at 4:32 a.m. and arrived within a few minutes, almost immediately. Responding officers noted that there were 3 cars in the driveway, and they were registered to Blake, Mary Jo, and then, of course, the one other vehicle that belonged to Tyler. And they parked across the street. This would be standard procedure. You don't park directly in front of the home that you're visiting. So they approached the home quietly, and they noted that they could hear someone talking inside. They did like officers do. They're trying to gather information about the call that they're going to, and they peeked in the window and saw someone pacing and talking to himself. They noted that it was a white male who had a disturbed look on his face, and he was grabbing books off of the shelf in the den and taking them out of the room, and they noted that he did this 3 times. They knocked on the door and rang the doorbell to try to get someone to the door, and at that time they noted that the lights went off. So this is kind of setting off the spidey senses of the police officers, and they called for more units to come. They knocked again, and Tyler finally answered the door, and he was wearing a black t-shirt and black shorts. His left hand was hidden behind his back, so they ordered him out of the house and handcuffed him. Remember, they're there investigating someone calling and saying, hey, this kid told us that he killed his parents. So they pull him out of the house and handcuff him. He's asked if his parents were home, and he said they were in West Palm Beach. That's something that the police deal with a lot whenever they're going to a party or anything like that. It seems like everyone forgets their parents' number and has no way to get in contact with them. They noted that he seemed frantic and annoyed and was somewhat incoherent. He made the comment that he knew he was going to Rock Road, so go ahead and take him there.
And Rock Road is the street that the jail is on, and so is commonly just referred to as Rock Road.
That's an interesting reaction for a kid to have who's, at this point we've had this call about him, but we don't know anything's happened yet. The police don't. They enter the home and Tyler starts to yell at him, don't go in there and you can't go in there. But of course they're going to. And they entered the home and saw that it was a disaster. The bedroom floor had open cigar packages and 15 empty beer bottles, and his brother's room was destroyed. The furniture was overturned and floors covered with clothing and bedding. I mean, the house was just a complete disaster. The officers located one of the family dogs, a black lab, in the closet. And as they're continuing to look through the house, they approached the master bedroom and noted that it was locked, but they saw streaks of dried blood all over the door, like the frame and the baseboards and that kind of thing. So obviously they're going to go in there to check, to make sure, to check the welfare of anyone that may be in the room. And they pushed the door, and with a little force, it opened. And as soon as they got in, they noted bloody towels, broken dishes, shattered glass, pillowcases, books, just a disaster like we talked about. But they also saw things that could be used to clean something up, like a mop, Clorox wipes, a canister of coffee grounds.
Just weird stuff piled up. I mean, that's just very odd.
Yeah, just everything all piled in the floor, I guess. So they removed that pile of debris, and that's where they found the bodies of Tyler's parents. And they were side by side and face down, towels wrapped around their heads with the claw hammer laying between them. Mary Jo was closest to the bed with her head nearest to the bedroom door, and she was wearing green capris and a white t-shirt. Blake was closest to an exit door with his feet nearest the bedroom door and was wearing blue shorts and a burgundy t-shirt.
So they were kind of turned opposite ways, but laying face down.
Right.
So the police, at this point, of course, they take Tyler to jail. They take him to Rock Road. During the investigation, here are some things that they learn about Tyler. Tyler seemed to be close to his parents. Even the weekend before, he had taken a trip to Georgia for this family reunion along with his dad and grandfather, and everybody there said things seemed fine. Tyler was known to be respectful and polite when he was younger, but once he entered high school, he kind of changed. He became eccentric and unpredictable, and he was somewhat troubled and just a bizarre kid. But he always tried to pull in a crowd around him. At one point during his youth, Tyler and some of his friends dragged an old couch into a clearing at the River Park Wildlife Preserve, where they doused it with gasoline and set it on fire. And the fire department responds. But because it didn't get too severe and spread around, these kids just got off with a warning. They probably called their parents and said, come get your kids, here's what they've done.
Yeah, and it kind of sounds like some typical stupid thing that teenagers would do.
Yeah. So in late April of 2011, now we're talking about around 10 weeks before the murders, Tyler had gotten into a fight at a friend's house, and he was arrested for aggravated battery, and he had spent a week at St. Lucie County Jail along with a 2 weeks house arrest. This is the point when Mary Jo took his cell phone and he had to use Facebook Messenger to communicate when he said to Mercedes, I faux show might kill my mom, you know. At this time, he also told a friend that sometimes he just wanted to die. A month before the murders, in June, he came home what he described as smashed after urinating on a friend's bed. And Mary Jo and Blake said, this is it. This is our last straw. So they took him to New Horizons, which is a mental health clinic, to get treatment, and he was forced to attend counseling. Mary Jo told her friends around this time that she wasn't afraid of Tyler and wasn't afraid that he would hurt her, but she was more afraid he was going to hurt himself. She herself had struggled with some depression, and she was concerned that this is what was going on with Tyler. And Tyler actually received counseling in the past for depression, and he was on medication for it. He was also diagnosed with an eating disorder and poor self-esteem. When Tyler was younger, like prepubescent age, he was given human growth hormone injections, and Mary Jo said that she thought this would help him develop and improve his self-esteem because he wasn't really growing like he should. And she just didn't want her kid to be teased for being short and chubby, which is understandable. Well, 2 weeks before the murders, Mary Jo had told friends that she felt like Tyler was finally improving and they were out of the dark or over the hurdle, and she felt like he was getting back to himself again. But as we know, that didn't happen.
So the funeral service had nearly 1,000 people in attendance. I mean, it drew a massive crowd.
Well, they were both very well-loved people, and her being a elementary school teacher, I'm sure that there was lots of her students and former students.
Right. Well, Ryan, of course, came back to town for his parents' funeral, and he said that after the funeral, he planned to go see Tyler in jail because that's what his parents would want him to do.
That's a big move on his part, trying to do what his parents would want, because he's probably got a lot of anger toward Tyler at this point.
Sure.
So let's talk about Tyler in jail and the trial. While he was in jail, he wrote letters to his grandparents and a friend and basically blamed his behavior on starting to take that pill, as he called it. And we don't know if he meant the prescription or an unprescribed drug, because he used both. He was taking an anti-anxiety medication and an antidepressant. And the depression medication is known to increase the risk of suicide in teens and young adults. And this is what Tyler's blaming it on. He told another friend that he waited until his brother moved out of the house to kill his parents. So his brother had moved out 6 weeks before, so he's saying he had been planning it for some time. Fellow inmates, again, we have jailhouse informants, testified Tyler told them he began planning the murders and the party about 3 weeks before he did it. He also receives fan mail in jail. He has been nicknamed Hammer Time, and he will sign autographs for fans and even other inmates using that nickname. Well, while he was in jail, he did obtain his GED, and he took his SATs where he got a 2100, which is a very good score. It puts him in the top percentile. They said he reads a lot in jail to kind of keep his mind active, I guess. The evidence that was presented at trial was a 17-inch, 22-ounce framing claw-type hammer. And they said that he testified, or he made the statement that he stood behind his mother for 5 minutes before he began hitting her. Well, when he started hitting his mother, he struck her 36 times to her head and her back. When he began hitting his father, Blake, he struck him 39 times to his head and chest. And remember, he was using the claw end of the hammer, not the flat part, but the claw end. Possible motives they looked at was his parents might have told him that they were going to put him in an inpatient rehab. Remember, they had taken him to an outpatient and he had counseling. So they pointed this as a possible motive for the murder. But they were unable to seek the death penalty because he was still 17 at the time of the murders. He was only 6 months from being 18, but a juvenile, the Supreme Court has ruled a person under the age of 18 cannot receive the death sentence for their crimes. In 2014, he wound up being sentenced to 2 life terms under mandatory sentencing guidelines. Tyler pled no contest on 2 counts of first-degree murder with a weapon. And like I said, there was mandatory sentencing guidelines, so when he pled to that, it was an automatic life sentence on each count. But we need to go back and talk about something because he appealed this, and his appeal was upheld based on a case called Miller v. Alabama from 2012.
All right, so in Miller v. Alabama, this is a case that involved Evan Miller, a 14-year-old, and his friend Colby Smith, who was 16, and they beat a 52-year-old neighbor to death with a baseball bat. stole some of his things, and set his mobile home on fire. Evan was 14 at the time of the crime, and he got a life sentence without parole for murder, and that's automatically applied after he is found guilty under the mandatory sentencing guidelines. His 16-year-old co-defendant did not get life because he pled to the charges. The case went all the way to the Supreme Court about life sentences and how appropriate they were for juveniles, and the court wanted to weigh their upbringing, intellectual abilities, and other factors. The biggest argument in this is obviously that the teen brain is not fully formed, that basically an adolescent brain has problems in its frontal lobe in particular with rationalization, impulse control, and decision making. Evan had been in foster care and in psychological programs and had suffered poverty and abuse and neglect, so he had not had a very stable home life, upbringing to the point of that crime. In fact, he had attempted suicide 4 times by the age of 14, with his first time being at age 6.
So that goes to tell you there's definitely some problems going on for a 6-year-old trying.
Sure. And the Supreme Court agreed with Miller's attorneys and said that mandatory sentencing after conviction should not apply to juveniles. They can still be sentenced to life, but they have to have a sentencing hearing to determine if that's appropriate based on the circumstances.
So this is what allowed his appeal to go through, and Florida court said, yes, he was given a mandatory sentence, and under Miller v. Alabama set precedents that he doesn't get a mandatory life sentence. He actually has to have a sentence hearing. So that's what was granted, not a new trial, but a new sentence hearing. So in 2016 is when his original sentence was thrown out. October of 2018, Tyler is 24 years old, living in the Okeechobee Correctional Institute, and he's had a few years under his belt in prison to think about it. And at his re-sentence hearing, he said he was remorseful and sorry for what he did, and he said he strives daily to better himself. He even said, I don't understand myself and the reasons for my atrocious actions. He said for him to try to explain would just be making excuses, and there's no excuse for what he did. Blake's brother, Mike Hadley, also testified at this sentence hearing, and he said he was happy with the sentence that Tyler received of the life sentences, but coming back to court again always made him feel like they were going to a funeral again, and that's very understandable. You're just reliving what happened. The thing with Tyler, though, is he didn't have an upbringing like Evan Miller did in Miller v. Alabama. He was not abused. He was given everything by his parents, and 2 parents that obviously loved him and tried to do what was best for him. So in the re-sentence hearing, he was re-sentenced to 2 life terms again. Tyler, some of the other things he said things weren't that bad, and I just can't justify it. And he said, why would I even want to try to justify it? He said, I was the one messing up. I don't think I can ever justify it, and I don't think I want to try to justify it. He said he regrets everything for everyone involved, and he was sorry for the whole thing, for stealing from them, for putting them through a whole bunch of stuff, and said he was just being a dumb kid. And when asked how he felt about himself, he said, I don't really like myself. When they asked him if he thought his sentence was fair, he said, yeah, it's pretty fair. The lawyers did the best they could. He was hoping for some relief at maybe 40, 50, or 60 years, but he felt it was a just sentence. But right before this re-sentence hearing, the defense brought in a behavior psychologist from Boston to kind of evaluate Tyler and see what was going on with him, if there was some kind of mental defect causing this. And this psychologist met with Tyler in the Okeechobee Correctional Institution in October of 2017. And Tyler had admitted that he had recently smoked some marijuana while in jail, which is really not uncommon, even though you would think it would be. Tyler tells him he got drunk the first time at the age of 12, and by 14 or 15, he was smoking pot, and then shortly after that, he began taking pills like Xanax, Percocet, and oxycodone, and those are some really strong narcotics. He said by 16, he was taking ecstasy and hallucinogens. And he said in his teen years, he would damage others' property, he would steal things, he would deface public property. He also admitted that these thoughts about killing his parents were just isolated to his parents. He never had homicidal thoughts toward anyone else. And when the psychologist asked him why, he said, I was just probably mad about getting in trouble. It wasn't anything major. He said when it started, he started thinking about it just a little bit. There was these thoughts that came into his head, but they began to increase in frequency, and he just became obsessed about it, like OCD thoughts that just wouldn't leave his head. He said that it was pretty intense, and he thought about it every day. He said it was like a movie in his head playing over and over again. He said he didn't make a plan on not getting caught because he didn't even think about that part, because the plan was to kill his parents and then kill himself. He told the psychologist that he did tell people. He said it started almost like a joke and friends thought he was joking, but nobody ever took him serious. He said he thought about doing it so often he would even say to himself, why am I even thinking these things? Because he knew it was wrong, but he could not get the thoughts out of his head. He said he thought that once he killed his parents, then everything would be over. He said at the time of the murders, it was this blind rage that once he started wouldn't stop, and it lasted long enough to commit these murders. And he said probably 17 seconds to 1 minute. He said, I remember my face being distorted and my teeth clenched, and I could feel the rage coming up. But after he was done, he looked in the mirror. He was covered in blood, but he felt this sense of relief, and he felt better. He said, but the relief only lasted a few minutes, and then it was kind of a detached feeling, like it wasn't real. He said he covered them up with the furniture and blankets and everything he could find because he couldn't look at them after what he had done. He said it was just like everything in that house had to go. Pictures of them. The mother had a board of spoons that was a collection. That had to go. The bread box, things on the counter, things in their dresser, their TV, and even a mirror that he had broken. It was just like he was putting everything together that needed to go. He said as time goes on, though, things tend to become vague as to what happened. His memories are kind of fading of it. When asked about why he had a party, he's like, I never had a party like that, so why not? When the psychologist asked him how he planned on killing himself, he said, well, I was going to back a car into the garage, leave it running, and die with carbon monoxide. But we know he didn't do that. He said this compulsive thinking he had was only kill my parents, have a party, commit suicide, and nothing beyond that. He said that's all he could think of. The psychologist asked why they needed to die. He said, he really didn't know. He had never felt that amount of rage about anyone ever before or since. And neither parent in particular was the target. It was both of them that were the target. He said while in jail, he still feels these moments of rage, but not near as intense as he did then. And he still has some detachment toward the murders, like they're still not real. And I kind of wonder if this is because that's a normal stage of grief. If it's remorse and grief working together, that makes him have this kind of detached feeling. And he's not around his family for them to be reliving it. So it's almost like it's not even real to him.
Yeah, it could be.
He said he didn't understand it, of course. And as he said in his re-sentence hearing, if he tried to understand it, it would be justifying it. And there was no justification.
So while he's been in jail, Tyler has managed to accomplish several things. He obtained his GED, obtained a computer typing skills certification, and he got certified as a teaching assistant.
So he has tried to do a few things to better his life.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, I also want to talk about parricide and some statistics on parricide.
So parricide is a homicide where one murders his or her father, mother, or close relative. But more often we use the term for a child that kills their parents, particularly when they kill both parents. The killing of a mother is matricide, and the killing of one's father is patricide. Looking at some FBI data, particularly in 2014, they had a total of 14,000 murders across the U.S., and only 169 of those were people killed by a family member younger than them. So it accounts for about 1% of all homicides. It's pretty rare.
Well, and that statistic, when it says by a family member younger than them, that doesn't mean just a juvenile who's killed their parents. It can also mean adults who kill their parents.
Right. Numbers for this are fairly consistent year to year, but obviously they garner a lot of media attention, and most cases are caused by an argument, and it's kind of shifted from the early 80s. In the early 80s, abuse and neglect usually was cited as playing a role in the killings, but that's not necessarily the case anymore. The problem with parricide is that it's not very easily predicted. Not like you would a typical homicide or domestic homicide, because it is so statistically unusual. It is a statistical anomaly for something that's a statistical anomaly. But there are some factors that they have noted that increase the likelihood of it occurring. If the parents of the child are chemically dependent or have some other dysfunction, if there's an ongoing pattern of family violence in the home, or if the conditions in the home worsen dramatically or violence escalates. If the juvenile becomes increasingly vulnerable to stressors in the home, maybe the living conditions have gotten a whole lot more stressful. And finally, if a firearm is readily available in the home, because juveniles are more likely to use a firearm than adults who kill their parents. Severe mental illness is not as big a factor in juveniles as it is in older parricide offenders. And I think that's probably because, like we talked about earlier with Miller v. Alabama, it's hard to say that it's a severe mental illness when you're already working with a brain that isn't fully developed yet anyway.
Yeah, and looking at these indicators or things that increase the likelihood, I don't think any of those applied to Tyler Hadley.
No, I mean, it doesn't appear. We don't really know whether his family kept firearms in the home, but that wasn't relevant to this case. It didn't sound like any of these other factors applied to him.
Some things you and I have talked about in the past discussing parricide is, one of the things is Blake Hadley was a lot bigger than his son. Why could Blake not stop Tyler? And we discussed, if you're a parent and you have a child attacking you, your brain is just, I would think it would be hard to reason that that's what's going on.
Yeah, I think even if you are the kind of person that considers themselves up on self-defense or situationally aware or, always paying attention, there are those people who are very aware of their surroundings and they have their head on a swivel for danger or anything like that. Even the most trained, proficient person at that, I think, would be caught off guard by an attack from a family member, particularly a child. It's like, in this case, how much realization did the father have? He comes to the conclusion that his child is killing him while it's happening. And it didn't take long, 17 seconds to a minute was his estimate of it. So, I don't know that the father, or the mother for that matter, in this case, has time to put together what's happening and mount any sort of defense. And one thing that I find interesting about this case, and these types of cases, is that if the parent comes to the realization in that moment that their child is launching a potentially fatal attack towards them, even if they get all of that strung together in that moment, did they take action against their own child? That would be tough. And I think it would be very hard for anyone to say definitively what they would do in that kind of situation.
Oh, I agree with that. And we've also discussed, intervention is the key to preventing a lot of things. And it looks like in this case, Tyler's parents they did everything they knew to do, and they were trying their best to keep their son on the right track. And I don't think any parent, no matter what your child has done, has the thought in their head, my child is going to kill me.
Right. Absolutely. And, Tyler had some rough things going on. And I would definitely say that maybe his behavior was not average. I don't know. It depends on what average is, but he wasn't like a rampaging, prior to this. He had given off nothing that indicated to his parents that this might be a potential thing. We know that he got arrested for the fight and he had some drug use here or there, but those are all behaviors that might be considered typical for a teenager. Yeah,
for some teenagers, for sure. Tyler says he can't justify it. He doesn't know the reason. And when I look at these type of cases and read them, because I have read a lot about parricide and parricide cases, when you get angry with somebody, even if you're upset with yourself about something that happened, or upset at work or school about something that happened, who do you take that rage out on normally?
I think you take it out on those closest to you. But I don't know. I disagree with Tyler saying he doesn't. I think that's kind of a cop-out, really, about he doesn't think about it a whole lot or try to understand it because that's justifying it. To me, that feels like a cop-out. I think that most people that have a good grasp of right and wrong, he knows what he did was wrong. I think he's choosing not to think about it. I have found that introspection is difficult for most people, particularly somebody that's murdered their family.
Yeah, and well, we're talking about he went to jail at 17, and even at 24, 25, 26, his brain's not fully developed till 25, around that age. But a lot of those brain forming things have not happened in jail. You're just kind of stagnant. So from 17 to whatever age he is now, a lot of that development hasn't happened as it normally would for a teenager too. But like you said, he may not know why, but I tend to think, and neither one of us are psychologists, but with law enforcement background and looking at these type of things, you see people get mad about all sorts of things. They'll get mad at the person at the checkout counter in Walmart and go home and beat their spouse because they're angry at somebody else. And I feel like, now this is my opinion, that rage Tyler had going on, for whatever reason he had rage, even if it was with himself, he was closest to his parents, and that's who was going to get the brunt of whatever he was going to do.
I don't know. I just don't see it that way.
No, we don't have to agree.
That would indicate that an external stimulus caused him to act that way. Hey, you said in your example, a person goes home and beats their spouse because of something the clerk said to him at the grocery store or whatever. There is no external stimulus we can point to with this. I mean, it seems like this kid pretty much
just had a rage building up.
Yeah, and obviously has some mental health defect. I mean, I don't think that can be overlooked. That's certainly a component of it, because there are plenty of people who become enraged by external stimulus or whatever reason, and some of those people act out on those they love, and some of those people act out on strangers. I mean, some of them honk horns and flip people off in traffic. Very few of them end up murdering anyone, and I think that the differentiating component there is obviously a mental health issue.
But he didn't have any major mental health. I mean, look at the number of people who have depression and anxiety. He didn't have schizophrenia or delusions or any of that. It wasn't a major mental health issue.
He didn't have a diagnosed major mental health issue at the time. He's 17. I mean,
that's true. Anyway, I'm interested to hear what other people think about it, because this type of case very closely hits home with me, and I'm interested to hear what other people think, because we've talked about this prevention before, and with this kind of case, I mean, in a majority of parricide type cases where there's a juvenile involved, there are not those indicators. And in this case, if his friends had taken him serious and said something, could that have changed the outcome? Because you see in several cases, people, especially teenagers, don't keep their mouth shut, and they're going to say things to their friends, even if it's in a joking manner. But at what point do you take that serious?
I don't know. I think that's such a difficult question, and I think it puts a lot of his friends in a bad spot. They probably feel guilty about it because maybe they feel like they could have prevented it. But, I mean, we deal with teenagers. We have teenagers, and we know that they say things all the time that you can't exactly take at face value.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. At what point do you do that? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I would like to have one, but
I don't think you can. I mean, I don't think you really can, because how do you know when somebody says, particularly in a text. And, we could do a whole different podcast about my opinions on electronic communication. But when it's completely devoid of any emotion or inflect in the voice or anything, one teenager sending a Facebook message to their buddy that says, OMG, I could just kill my parents, or I should kill my parents. I can see why no teenager on the receiving end of that, even if it's said pretty frequently, is going to put any weight behind that. And it's unfortunate because in some cases it might prevent something horrible from happening, but it probably also gets said hundreds of thousands of times a day on Facebook Messenger.
Well, I'm sure you're right about that. But if you have teenagers, talk to them, because I preach all the time. If you see something, say something. And even if it doesn't seem significant, say something, because this is just, I don't know if this was preventable, but we do know he did say something about it. Let us know what you think.
All right. We'll see you next week. Hope you enjoyed this week's case. As always, you can reach us by email at truecrimeoutloud@gmail.com, on Facebook and Instagram at True Crime Out Loud. Out Loud is 2 words, not one. On Twitter at TC Out Loud, or on our website at truecrimeoutloud.com.
Photos, links, and sources for this podcast can be found on our website at www.truecrimeoutloud.com.